Shalom from Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. I am proud to introduce a new episode of Lessons from Our Parents, and this time with CNN's Wolf Blitzer, the son of Holocaust survivors. Not long ago, the BAFTA Prize, the British equivalent of the Oscar or the Academy Awards, was given to an Israeli student's film. Its name is Girl Number 6047, that being the number tattooed in Auschwitz in the arm of the director's grandmother. When I watched that film, I understood how important it is when influencers, whether it is in cinema, in poetry, in journalism, in politics, in influencing walks of life, tell the story of the Holocaust. And Wolf Blitzer, by his strong relationship with Yad Vashem, by his entire career and activity, comprehends exactly that responsibility and always implements it. And for that we are very grateful to Mr. Blitzer. Today we will hear from Wolf the story of his parents, their survival, and the legacy that as Holocaust survivors they gave us, the inspiration they give us. It will be a very interesting, inspiring episode of Lessons from Our Parents.
Hello, my name is Lawrence Burian, and on behalf of the American Society for Yad Vashem, it is my pleasure to introduce you to an important conversation in our series, Lessons from Our Parents. This series features entrepreneurs, builders, leaders, and dreamers who proudly lay claim to being children of Holocaust survivors. It is my pleasure today to have this conversation with Wolf Blitzer, a noted journalist and anchor at CNN's The Situation Room, providing viewers with in-depth reports on the political, international, and breaking news stories of the day. Wolf played an important role during the most recent 2020 election cycle, moderating several presidential town halls and debates, and played a critical role in CNN's expanded coverage of the coronavirus pandemic during its peak in 2020. Beyond politics, Wolf is known for his in-depth reporting on international news and for his expertise on the Middle East, beginning with the start of his career in 1972 with the Reuters news agency in Tel Aviv and as a Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Jerusalem Post for 15 years. Throughout his career, Wolf has interviewed some of history's most notable figures, including many U.S. presidents and the most famous of foreign leaders. His reporting has earned him numerous honors and awards for excellence in broadcast journalism, including, for example, a George Foster Peabody Award, the Alfred I. DuPont Award, and the Edward R. Murrow Award. He is also the author of 2 books, Between Washington and Jerusalem, A Reporter's Notebook, and Territory of Lies. Wolf also happens to be the proud son of Cesia and David Blitzer, Jewish refugees from Nazi-occupied Poland, and the grandson of 4 grandparents, all of whom were murdered during the Holocaust. Wolf, it's an honor to be here with you today. And if we could just jump right in, we'd love to hear the story of your parents and their Holocaust background.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. It's really important and so timely right now, given what's going on in our country and indeed around the world, increase in anti-Semitism. And it's important that we all learn from history and especially learn from our own personal history. And I'm grateful to you and Yad Vashem for what you're doing over all of these years. And I've visited Yad Vashem on many occasions during my visits to Israel. So I know I'm fully aware of all the important work that you do, and I'm grateful. My parents were young. They were survivors. They survived the Holocaust, Polish Jews. My father was from a town called, well, everybody knows it, Auschwitz. He was from the town.
He was actually from Auschwitz.
He was from the town of Auschwitz. In those days, my dad would always tell me, every town in Poland had 3 names. It had a Polish name, a Yiddish name, and a German name. The Polish name, Oświęcim, the Yiddish name, Auschwitzin, and the German name, Auschwitz. And so when I grew up in Buffalo, New York, where my parents came after World War II, I would often hear my dad speaking about Auschwitzin this, Auschwitzin that, which I didn't realize until later. Auschwitzin was the Yiddish name for Auschwitz. There was a small village. It was a little town where the Nazis built the death camp.
But was it a primarily Jewish community?
It was half and half. It was about half and half. And my dad would always say that before the war, when he was growing up, he was born in 1920. So, he was a teenager growing up. He said the relationship, he thought, was pretty good between the Jews and the non-Jews in Auschwitzin, in his town. And he remembered, he grew up in a pretty Orthodox Jewish background, very religious. And my mother, on the other hand, also grew up in Poland, Jewish, but from a much more secular, less Orthodox background. And they met after the war. He thought the relationship between the Jews and the non-Jews in Auschwitzin, or Auschwitz, the city, the town, was pretty good. He remembers playing soccer with the non-Jewish boys, and he thought it was a pretty good relationship. But then, of course, the Holocaust developed, and his parents, my grandparents on my dad's side, were taken to Auschwitz, the death camp, and that's where they were killed. And as
do you have any idea what year they were taken?
Well, I'm guessing it must have been in 42 or 43 or whatever. But I really didn't know that they were killed in Auschwitz until I visited Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, because my dad had done a testimony at Yad Vashem. He did one at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington. He did one in Florida, where he had retired at a Holocaust Education and Documentation Center. But when I visited Yad Vashem for a piece I was doing on CNN about my family history, my family roots, it was there that it was confirmed to me that my paternal grandparents were killed at Auschwitz.
It's a wonderful piece, and I encourage people to look it up. I'm sure you can get it on YouTube. It's very well done.
Well, thank you.
How did you think your grandparents had passed away?
Well, I knew my parents were pretty open with my older sister and me as we were growing up in Buffalo about what they went through during the years of the war, during the years of the Holocaust. So I knew they were killed, but I didn't know all the details. I didn't know what happened to them at Auschwitz, Treblinka, until I actually went there and I saw the oral history and the documentation that was provided to me, and what my dad had told, the people at Yad Vashem.
So your grandparents on your father's side were taken and killed in Auschwitz. What happened to your father?
My dad was young and he was strong. He was taken to various slave labor camps, and he and a brother survived. His brother died at the very end, but for years they survived. One sister survived, my aunt Rachel, or as we called her, Ruchje.
So there were 3 children?
No, there were 6. And all of them, except for my dad and my aunt, my Tante Ruchje, as we called her, all of the others were killed. They died.
So if your father's born, you said in 1920?
Yes.
So he was a teenager.
Yeah.
So he survived in labor camps.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what kind of labor he was doing?
He was doing forced labor. It was at the end he was working at these various train locations, and his job was when they were separating trains to make sure the trains were separated, and that was one of his jobs. But he was working in various factories. My mother, at Szkarzycku, which was a slave labor camp elsewhere in Poland, she worked together with her brothers and sisters, worked at an ammunition factory where the Nazis were making ammunition. And she would always tell us that she was very proud that when she was putting together various ammunition parts, she wouldn't do it correctly, so that it really wouldn't work.
My father, who's a survivor, was packing parachutes.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that they let a prisoner pack parachutes? So,
my mom was very proud that she never really did a good job putting the ammunition together. She was hoping it would explode and kill the Nazis.
So let's shift over to your mom's story. So your mom, you mentioned the name of the town. I'm not going to try to pronounce it.
Szkarzycku.
Okay.
That's where the slave labor camp was.
And so how old was she?
My mom was born in 1922.
Okay.
So she was
also
a couple of years. Yeah, she was a
yeah,
teenager. She
yeah.
was strong. Her parents, died from typhus after they were taken to a camp. So I never knew any of my four grandparents. They were all killed, during the Holocaust. So I never, had grandparents. I don't remember
It's
that.
awful.
Yeah, but my parents, as I was growing up, and as my sister was growing up in Buffalo, they were always pretty open about their past, and they didn't hide the fact they were Holocaust survivors, or that they lost their parents and brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and cousins. We knew that as we were growing up, and obviously they were pretty honest and pretty open with us, and it was just part of us growing up in Buffalo.
So I'd love to come back to that in a bit, about that childhood experience of being a child of survivors. But staying with your mother's story, at least what I gathered from that CNN piece was that she had a pretty brave decision that she made that ultimately probably saved her life. Is that something you would be willing to talk about?
Yeah, at the end, when it looked like the war was going to be over, they wanted to take all the prisoners, all the Jewish prisoners at this ammunition factory where they were working, and move them and put them on a march. And her brother and sister were sort of weak, and she didn't think they would survive. So she organized that all of them would hide underground in a basement as they were being
At
removed.
the factory.
Yeah, at the factory. And she thinks that saved the life of her sister, my Aunt Paula, who survived the war. And my mother, felt that my Aunt Paula wouldn't have survived, and maybe my Uncle Mike, her younger brother, wouldn't have survived either if they had been forced on this forced march that they were taking all these prisoners.
She ever described to you the calculus of the risk of being missing and being searched for, and versus that's a decision that not as straightforward.
My mom was the real leader, the matriarch of that family. She really took charge. She just thought that was the safest thing to do. She didn't think that her brother and sister could survive.
They just couldn't survive the walk, so
the
march,
yeah, right.
Which
and the weather was not good or whatever. And so she said, let's just hide here in the basement in this ammunition factory and let them all leave and let's see what happens, which was a brilliant decision on her part. And she was very proud of that, as she should have been.
And you said your mother's parents passed away from typhus during the war?
Yeah.
And that was in a camp. Do you know which, or
in the Skarzysku?
Oh, right, in the same place.
Right. It was in Poland.
So she was there when this was happening.
Yes. Yeah.
Horrific.
It was a terrible situation. And my grandparents on my mother's side were from this town called Sukhaniev, which they talked about all the time. And I went to visit Sukhaniev when I was doing this Roots piece for CNN. And they were pretty successful. My maternal grandparents, my grandfather had a factory, and they would manufacture clay and sell it for pottery and stuff like that. And it was a pretty successful factory. I went to see that factory, when I was doing this reporting for this, this heritage piece about my history, my family history, that was on CNN. And they were a pretty successful family. They had some money, and they were doing well until, of course,
right, it's all taken,
the Nazis
obviously.
came and then everything was gone.
So how were your parents each liberated, and how did they meet?
My dad was on this forced march when he was being moved from one camp, and he was liberated by the French military. And as he told my sister and me, the first words he learned in French were Juif, Jew, and Vive la France, he would say, Vive la France, because the French military liberated my dad and others who were with him. Most of his brothers and sisters were killed, and his parents were killed, obviously. His uncles and aunts were killed. But he survived, and he was liberated by the French. My mother was liberated by the Russians. They came into this area where she and her brother and sister were hiding out, and the Soviets.
They come out of the basement of this factory.
Yeah, and the Soviets were there, and they liberated them. So, remember those days, the Russians and Soviets, the French, the Americans, the British, they were all allies. Yeah. And so my mother told how the Russians liberated her, and my dad would always say the French liberated him. So it was, and then after the war, what most of the Holocaust survivors did, as my parents told me, is they would try to find out who survived. They didn't know. And it wasn't as if you could go online or anything.
I think back, I think back after 9/11 with all those signs on the wall. I mean, if you were in New York, for all the missing people, and it always gave me that sense of these people coming back from the camps looking, because, it just wasn't on the internet, obviously, and just trying to track people down.
So what they would do is they would go around to various places and say, did this person survive this? And they would look for information. So my mother was looking for information, and my dad was looking for information, and they were on a train, and they met, and they started talking. They were, and as they said, they quickly fell in love, and within a few days, my dad proposed to her.
The will to rebuild and to start anew is extraordinary.
Well, as they said to me and my sister over the years, they didn't know what was going to happen next week. And so all of a sudden my mom and my dad fall in love, and they said, let's get married.
Right. Now's the time. Let's do it.
So
did your father go back to his birth town, and did he? There's so much discussion about what did people know at the time, and I've been to Auschwitz-Birkenau and seen it. That town is right there. Did he go back and confront in any way his neighbors?
He never really wanted to. They wanted to get out of there. They had heard that if you go to Germany, there was an American sector in Germany, that there would be a good chance, if you're there, you'd have a better chance of getting visas to come to America than to go, than if you stayed in Poland, for example.
Right, so it was time to move on.
Yeah, so it was time to move on. So they wound up in Germany, and my mom and dad, as they were going around looking for survivors of their family members, they met on a train, and the train was taking them to Germany. I later was told by them and checked it out, when they were married, they were looking for a rabbi to marry them. They were in the American sector and military sector in Germany, and the only rabbi they could find was a U.S. Army chaplain who was a rabbi.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Who married them. Many, many, many years later, I met the family of this rabbi who married my mom and dad.
That's
in Germany.
Awesome. Yeah, they married in Germany.
They got married in Germany.
States.
Yeah, but it was an American rabbi, a chaplain in the U.S. Army. That's how they got married, and it was a pretty impressive story.
So let's flash forward, and obviously we know that you ultimately your parents settled in Buffalo, although you were born in Germany, right?
Well, what happened was, and my dad was very proud of this, that after the war he survived. He was relatively healthy, and he was in this town Augsburg, Germany, which was in right not too far from Munich, and it was in the American sector. He was basically selling cigarettes and trying to make a living doing some stuff, selling stuff, and including to U.S. soldiers. And he was making a little money, not much, but a little money. But one day he was in Munich, and he sees a long line. And he would often say, he said, in those days you see a long line.
You get on it.
You go wait in line.
What it is.
I mean, all these people are waiting in line. There must be something good at the end of the line. Why are all these people waiting in line? So he went to the end of the line, and he said, after about half an hour, he said to the woman in front of him, Fräulein, by the way, and my dad could speak German, why are we waiting in line? And she said, visas. And so my dad said, visas for what? America. My dad said, visas for America. The House and Senate in Washington had just passed what was called the Displaced Persons Act of 1948.
This was Truman, right?
Yeah, which granted several 100,000 visas to displaced persons including Holocaust survivors who were displaced persons. And President Truman signed it into law. I think 400,000 visas were granted, were approved in this legislation. So when my dad got to the line, she said visas, and so eventually he got to the front of the line, and he signed up my mom and dad, my mother's younger sister. He signed up my mother's one younger brother, one older brother. My dad had one sister who survived, my aunt, and signed them all up. And eventually they got notification that you've been approved to come to America. But they would tell you where you're going, to what city. So my dad and mom were told, you're going to Buffalo. And so my dad said, Buffalo, where's that? They said, New York. And my dad said, oh, New York.
Right.
A lot of Jewish people in New York.
Right down the block from the Lower East Side.
We'll go to New York. He didn't know Buffalo was 400 miles from New York City. So they wound up in Buffalo. And they were helped in the process when they took a boat to Boston. And then from Boston, they got on a train to go to Buffalo. And the HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, paid for their train ride from Boston to Buffalo for 4 people. My mom and dad and my older sister and me, and we were both born in Augsburg, but I was like, a little boy. And my sister was a year and a half older than me. So it was they said HIAS paid $12 per ticket to go from Boston to Buffalo. And I've got the documentation from HIAS.
Amazing.
I've gone through the paperwork. So they wound up in Buffalo, couldn't speak English, had little money, but the community the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community was really welcoming and receptive and helped them. And my dad immediately got some housing. And the first job that he got was in Lackawanna, outside of Buffalo, at Bethlehem Steel, in the Bethlehem Steel plant. And he could make a little money, but it was a horrible job. He hated it. And my mom hated him going to the Bethlehem Steel plant. And then eventually, he and my Uncle Sam Friedman, who married my Aunt Paula, my mother's younger sister, they also were in Buffalo. They had originally been told, you got visas, but you're going to Omaha, Nebraska.
Right, big Jewish
or
community
Wilmington,
there.
Delaware. My Uncle Mike was told he's going to Wilmington, Delaware. And my dad, who was a leader, he said, look, we didn't survive the war to be separated like this. We're all going to Buffalo. So they all went to Buffalo. And my Uncle Sam Friedman, and my dad, they were working at Bethlehem Steel. They hated it. But they decided to open a little deli in Buffalo called Blitzer's. On Hurdle Avenue. And it became a little popular deli, but my dad didn't like that either. And eventually, because of his good friends, Harry and Joe Wolf in New Jersey, who became home builders in New Jersey, they also got visas, and they were told they're going to Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is where they went. And so Harry and Joe, who my dad knew from, during the war, said to my dad, Dave, you should go into the home building business. The people need houses, and it's a good business. My dad said, I don't know anything about home building. He said,
figure it out.
Dave, you're a smart guy. You'll learn how to do it. Go and buy some land and start building homes, which is what Harry and Joe had done in New Jersey and became very successful, and which is what my dad started to do in Western New York, in Buffalo. Started buying some land, had a little money, and building homes, and became a very successful home builder in Western New York. Single-family homes. That's one of the reasons I love Buffalo so much, is because this community
really
took us in, gave us this opportunity to start a new life.
So I want to ask you, though, about, being an immigrant yourself, certainly child of immigrants, I can't imagine your parents spoke any English when they arrived. Having no grandparents. Did your parents, by the way, have tattoos in their arms? So
no.
They weren't tattooed.
They had no numbers.
So you went to public school?
Yes.
So did you feel different from the other kids? Did you feel, what did it mean to you to be the child of Holocaust survivors? Was it more that you're a child of European immigrants, or was the Holocaust a significant part of your identity and your home?
And the Holocaust was clearly a very significant part of my identity. The fact that my parents were Holocaust survivors. There was a group of Holocaust survivors in Buffalo who settled in Buffalo. The highest helped them settle in Buffalo. And all of them had kids who were relatively my age. And so I grew up with other kids whose parents were Holocaust survivors too. So it was just part of our life. And they had clubs, a club of all the immigrants, the Holocaust survivors who settled in Buffalo, and they were called Greenas, like greenhorns, but they were called Greenas. So it was just, they were my parents' friends. They would all, hang out, and they had a new life. They had a wonderful life in Buffalo. They were all making a good living, but they also enjoyed, they went on vacations, they traveled, they had parties, went to weddings, and all sorts of, it was a nice life that they had.
So,
and I grew up with their kids, so it was just part of
so this
the way
was
I grew
right.
up.
So this was normal.
Yeah.
When you think about people, your parents, losing their parents, losing siblings, losing uncles, losing aunts, losing their community, losing their citizenship, right? Any one of those things would knock a person back, and in many ways, understandably, would be unrecoverable. Certainly, all happening at the same time. To what do you attribute their ability to have that kind of life, to celebrate and weddings and dinner parties and social clubs and raise healthy, successful children? How do you explain that?
I think in part is because my mom and dad were very special, and they were deeply in love. They had a wonderful marriage, a wonderful relationship. And my dad would always say, we'll do whatever Cesia wants, Cesia, my mom. Whatever Cesia, it was a beautiful, beautiful love affair. And that helped them adjust to a new life and to overcome the tragedies that their families had gone through. And they appreciated the opportunities that were given to them in Buffalo to start a new life.
I gather they were very patriotic.
They loved America. We had an American flag flying outside our home all the time, not just on 4th of July. Or whatever, because this country gave my parents an opportunity. They came with nothing, and they obviously had a wonderful opportunity. And my mom and dad were always so proud of everything that they had accomplished, but they were so grateful to America for giving them the opportunity to start a new and wonderful life and to raise two kids, my older sister and me, and they were just so appreciative of everything.
So it's quite extraordinary coming from where they came from and where you came from, frankly, born in the situation you were born in, to rise to be in the role that you're in, not just successful, but part of the shaping of the United States and at the highest levels. So how did this, and do you feel that there's a linear connection between this childhood of yours and the experience that your parents had and your professional growth?
Well, my mom and dad were always so appreciative of the opportunities that America gave them and gave their kids. And especially their proudest moments were when they would see me on television reporting the news on CNN. And given the anti-Semitism that they endured in Europe, in Poland, before the war, during the war, they were so appreciative that only in America could a Jewish boy like
only
this,
in America,
be on television reporting the news. And it was it was a very proud moment for them. And as they often said to me when I was reporting the news, I've been with CNN now as we speak for more than 32 years, going back to the first Gulf War when I was the Pentagon correspondent for CNN. And when they would see me on CNN, they would always say, this is the best revenge to Hitler, that this Jewish boy whose parents were Holocaust survivors, who lost his grandparents, was now on television reporting the news.
Did your mom also call you and ask you if you were eating? And if
of course, yeah.
So she's still a Jewish mother.
Of course, yeah. But they were always very proud of that.
How
could they not
be?
Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you worked at the Jerusalem Post. So that's obviously a very well-respected Israeli publication. You were living in Israel, I assume. So that's an interesting career choice, right? Obviously going to Israel. And how would you connect that, if there is a connection, to the discussion we're having?
For my bar mitzvah, when I turned 13, my parents decided, instead of throwing a big bar mitzvah party, that my mom and dad would take my older sister and me to Israel. We had never been to Israel for my bar mitzvah. When I was finishing graduate school here in Washington, I started international relations at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington. Got a master's degree, and I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do with that degree. Maybe go on for a PhD, or maybe go into diplomacy or business or whatever. Somebody said to me, you want to be a journalist? And I said, journalist? I had never studied journalism. I had never written for the school newspaper or radio or anything like that. But they told me that the Reuters news agency, which is a British wire service, had a program to train young journalists who had good education and were smart. And I applied for this job, and they gave me this job working in their Tel Aviv bureau.
Oh, I see. So you started with them in Tel Aviv.
So my first job in journalism was working for Reuters, the British news organization, in Tel Aviv. And that's where I started working.
And that was random. You didn't request that. That's where they put you.
It was when I finished Johns Hopkins at SAIS, the School of Advanced International Studies. I went to Israel that summer, and that's when somebody said, you should really apply for this.
Okay, so it was through...
Yeah, I was in Israel, just traveling around, and somebody said, Reuters has this program in Tel Aviv. And I applied, and to my amazement, the bureau chief for Reuters hired me, and I stayed, and they really trained me. They had these old British journalists, Colin Bickler and these others, who really were very instrumental in giving me the foundations. I had never written a story, I'd never written, but they really trained me to be a journalist, and were willing to work with me and help me. And that's when I, got the journalistic bug. And I said, hey, I love news. I've always been a news junkie. My parents were always news junkies in Buffalo. We'd watch the evening news on television, have dinner, and it just seemed like something natural that go ahead and as I discovered then, and as I tell young journalism students nowadays, interns at CNN and college students, if you can find a career that you're passionate about, that you love doing something, you'll do it well, you'll enjoy it, you'll get up in the morning and look forward to going to work. I still get up in the morning and look forward to going to work because I know I'm going to learn something. It's a lifelong education. I'm going to be making a living asking tough questions for newsmakers and reporting what's going on here in the U.S. and around the world. So it's just been a blessing for me.
You said at the outset that this discussion is at a particularly relevant time.
When you and I are talking.
Yeah. There's unfortunately a lot of hate in this world right now, maybe always, but it feels that way. And when you're a news anchor, right? There's being balanced and impartial, and at the same time, you come with this background, Jewish background, Holocaust background. How does it affect your reporting of a story? How does it affect the questions you ask to a world leader? Does it? Can you talk about that?
Well, the training that I got in journalism from these, highly respected veteran British journalists who worked for Reuters and trained me was, you're not the story. You just report the news, and you do it as fairly and as responsibly and as accurately as you possibly can. And you don't want to be part of the news. And that's the way I was, I was ingrained in journalism, to report the news and whatever the news was, but to do it in a fair and responsible way. And if you're going to report something negative about someone, make sure you give that person an opportunity to respond before you put it to print or put it on the air, because you may get a different perspective. And you just have to be fair. And that's what I've always tried to do, is just report the news as responsibly and as accurately, as fairly as I possibly can.
There seems to be a trend of Holocaust trivialization, or almost using Holocaust references in a way that's not serious. How do you, when you're doing an interview or you see that in the news and someone refers to it as, and I even see it in my personal life where somebody, will take a joke like, oh, he's a Nazi about.
And you're a son of Holocaust survivors.
Right. So I have a visceral reaction to it, and you're on air. You're trying to not be the story. How does that affect you?
It just comes with your training. All of us are human beings. We all have personal, points of view and perspectives and orientations, and so we all, come with certain perspectives. But when you're a serious journalist, you try to go above that and just report the news, which is the way I was trained in this journalism business of ours, and that's what I've always tried to do, and avoid being part of the story.
You're doing this interview and you're taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to help educate people about the Holocaust, hopefully inspire people to learn more, but also to look at the lessons that came out of it in terms of how to rebuild and grow. Are there specific learnings or lessons from the Holocaust that you would particularly want to impart now that we're having this conversation?
The main lesson that my dad taught me about the Holocaust, and he was a Polish Jew, and it comes from a nice background in Poland, but the biggest surprise he learned during the World War II and the Holocaust was that the Germans were responsible, became Nazis, and committed these atrocities against Jews and others, not just Jews, but others as well. And he said that the shock to him was that as he was growing up in Poland, it was German culture that was considered,
the highest,
the top tier.
Intelligentsia, universities.
In terms of music and art and drama and science and everything. And what he always said is, if the Germans were capable of deteriorating and becoming these mass murderers, it's possible it could happen anywhere.
So a sense of vigilance.
So you got to really be careful, and you got to watch what's going on, because if this really highly respected German culture was capable of resulting in death camps and concentration camps, mass murder, gas chambers, if the Nazis, the Germans, were capable of this, given their, tremendous appreciation for their culture and their history and their music and art and science and everything, then it could happen anywhere.
Look, as I think about it, talking to you, Nazi propaganda and the manipulation of the news was such a powerful tool in the toolkit of Hitler's rise to power and the depersonalization of the Jew, et cetera. And when you say, as a matter of fact, just reporting the news, just not being, but reporting the news is actually, accurately, is actually critical, this to our democracy and to not let a society go down a road that happened, obviously, over there all those years ago.
That's what we do at CNN, and I'm very proud of what CNN does. Is we check the news, we have fact checkers, we try to be as responsible as we can, and if there are lies out there, we'll call them lies.
You'll call them out.
And I really think CNN and other news organizations, but CNN, which is, I love CNN, I've been with CNN for a long time, we do it, and we do it well. And when we see atrocities going on, we report it, whether in Europe or Africa or Asia or anywhere in the world, South America. And it's important that the world sees what's going on in a responsible, accurate way. When Ted Turner, who founded CNN, created CNN in 1980, when we went on the air, he said, when he hired me in 1990, 10 years later, he said to me, "Remember, Wolf," he said, "we're the cable news network,"
right.
NEWS.
Yeah, not cable news. Entertainment network.
We report the news, and the news comes first. And you just remember that. And of course, it stayed with me all these years.
So if it's okay with you, I'd like to shift gears. We've been doing a segment in these interviews, the lightning round, not a unique name. But the idea really is for viewers to get a chance to know you a little bit better in a more lighthearted way. The topic that we were just talking about is pretty heavy and serious, and this is an opportunity just to have a little bit of fun. So if you're game for it, it's to ask some questions. They're intended to be a little bit irreverent, maybe, and you're cool?
Go ahead.
All right. So my first question is, I would love to know your secret, which is how do you manage to keep your beard exactly at the same trim at all times?
Mondays and Thursdays, I have a beard trimmer at home. It's a Wahl, W-A-H-L, beard trimmer.
Okay.
It's got a perfect little guard on it, so you can't shave it. You can't go too
Mondays
deep.
and Thursdays.
Mondays and Thursday mornings, I shave my neck. Am I giving you too much information?
No, this is exactly what our viewers want to know.
And then I take my Wahl beard trimmer and I can just go up and down.
All right, so this is managed by yourself personally. This is not a team. I'm picturing a team at CNN personally that has that responsibility.
No one trims my beard but me.
Wow.
Okay.
Independent.
Right.
Okay. So is there one person in the world that you wish you could have met that you haven't?
Well, there's a lot of people I wish I could have met.
Who comes to mind?
I mean, Moses. I would have loved to have met Moses, for example.
Yeah. I would think that'd be a pretty intimidating.
That would be a pretty good interview.
Yeah. You think he'd let you do that, or he would just take it over?
I don't know how much he wanted publicity.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, but he would have been a good interview.
So when you were a child and you first heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood, were you cheering for the wolf?
No.
Really?
I was always cheering for Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah. I knew that there were good wolves like me and bad wolves out there.
Oh, that was a bad wolf.
There's some of those wolves out there not good.
Yeah.
But the good wolf, me, the bad wolf.
So you were able already, you had a certain moral compass that you were able to.
I knew good from bad.
You knew good from bad.
Yeah.
And you just weren't going to let, something partisan like having the name.
No, I liked Little Red Riding Hood. She was
So
nice.
is it true, again, this is an opportunity to dispel rumors, that when your children misbehaved when they were younger, you put them in the situation room?
That's not true.
Not true.
Not true at all.
No.
But I do have a situation room. And you can ask me the question, why do you call it the situation room?
Why do you call it the situation
That's a good
room?
question.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Thanks for asking me that question. Because whatever room I'm in, there's a situation.
Yeah,
and there's
I gather.
I'm Wolf Blitzer and you're in the situation.
I am in the situation, although I'm asking the questions
Okay,
now.
go ahead.
Have you ever been, I guess this is more of a serious question, have you ever been truly afraid to report a story, either physical danger or fear of repercussions? And is there a story that jumps out?
I've covered wars, and I've had Scud missiles come in, and I've been in dangerous situations, and so I've been afraid, obviously. And there have been times when I've gone to tough situations and wasn't exactly sure I was going to get out. Went to North Korea and spent a few days in Pyongyang, and eventually, it was an exciting, important trip. Went with Bill Richardson, who was then the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, who was going there to try to bring home some Americans who were being held, and he invited me to go with him, so I went.
It's a shame you didn't get to go with Dennis Rodman.
Yeah. But I went there with Ambassador Bill Richardson. He was then former governor of New Mexico, and at the end of the trip, it was clear that we were going to get out what we wanted to get out. And I got a little nervous about that, but eventually we did get out, so that worked out. But there have been wars and other dangerous situations where I, reported the news and done so.
So there's I don't know how well known of a fact this is, but there is a professional soccer team in Buffalo who has a nickname, the Blitzers, named after you. So if you were a professional athlete and you were a star, maybe you are. Well, you're not a professional. If you were a star professional athlete, what sport, what position?
Well, I love baseball and I love basketball. I did play football in high school, at Kenmore West Senior
You were
High
probably a
School.
linebacker, just
I
given
was a
your body
linebacker,
type.
and
Yeah.
I used to like to blitz, blitzing linebacker, and I had the name for a blitzer. But I was not very big, not very fast. I wasn't very good. I loved basketball, but I realized early on in junior high that I could dribble with my right hand, but not very
couldn't
much
go
with
left.
my left hand.
Yeah, once
And
the scouting
I was
report
not
came
that
out, they'd
fast,
guard you right.
and my shooting was not that good, so my basketball career was over pretty early.
But we're going to dream. You have any skill set, so you want to be the winning quarterback? You want to be hoisting the Stanley Cup?
When I was a freshman at the University of Buffalo, the State University of New York at Buffalo, which is where I got my BA, early in my freshman year, and Buffalo's football, the University of Buffalo in those days was not much of a football team. So they were saying, if you want to come out and try out for the football team, just come out. And so I said, hey, I played football in high school. I was a linebacker. Let me go see what it's like. So I remember going to the University of Buffalo football team, and there was some practice, and I went out there and put on the shoulder pads and the whole 9 yards. And the next week,
no pun intended.
The next week, we had a scrimmage. It was a scrimmage. It wasn't really a game against another upstate New York football team, Syracuse University, which was a real serious football university. And they came to Buffalo, and it was a scrimmage. And early on, one of our linebackers, I was just on the sidelines, but one of our linebackers was injured, and so the University of Buffalo coach looks for somebody who had a number in the 50s, because those were the linebackers. And he says, 56, I think that was my number. He says,
you're in.
I said, me? So I go out there, and I'm a linebacker, and I look in the backfield at Syracuse University, and there's like a halfback or a fullback, and he sees me out there, and he looks at me like this, and he goes like this. And then he goes like this to me. And I said, holy God, this guy's going to kill me. And of course, he gets the ball. He starts running towards me. I have to make a life and death decision again. This big guy. Do I try to tackle him, or do I sort of fake it a little bit? I faked it a little bit. That was really the end of my football career. He runs right over me.
That prepared you for the Scuds.
And scores a touchdown. And I come to the sidelines after that awful situation. And one of my Buffalo teammates says, you know who that is? And I said, no, who's that? He said, that's Floyd Little.
Oh, man.
I said, Floyd Little. And Floyd Little it was freshman Syracuse University, freshman University of Buffalo, scrimmage. And in those days, only freshmen could play against each other. And I said, but everybody knew Floyd Little. He was going to be a superstar. And he eventually did become a superstar, Heisman Trophy winner, I think, NFL Hall of Famer. And I said, oh, well, at least, it was Floyd Little who ran right over me. Now, flash forward 20 or 30 years later, I'm speaking at the Denver Council on Foreign Relations. And the host in Denver, and Floyd Little wound up playing for the Denver Broncos. The host said, you know who's sitting over there? And I said, who's that? He said, that's Floyd Little. He was then an executive.
I hope from across the room you went like this.
He was sitting there. So after my presentation, after the lunch, I of course go up to him. I said, Floyd, remember me? He said, well, I of course seen you on television and all that. And I said, Floyd.
Oh, you did it!
He said, I used to do that all the time.
Oh, you did it!
He said, when did I do that to you? I said, freshman year, Syracuse, Buffalo, scrimmage.
That's awesome.
I said, you don't remember when you ran right over me? He said, I remember.
He ran over a lot of people.
And that was a cute moment. But that was the end of my football career.
It was the end.
My basketball career didn't live very long. My baseball career was not that great. I loved sports, and I still do. And I go to a lot of games and enjoy my Washington Nationals, my Washington Wizards, my Buffalo Bills. But I was not, that talented to become a professional athlete.
So, talking about, talents, what was more difficult for you? Learning how to use the magic wall touchscreen on election night, or teaching your parents how to program a VCR?
Well, fortunately, we have John King doing the magic wall.
Oh, right, that's true.
So he's really good at that. I could just ask a few questions. What about Indiana? What about, whatever? And he would go to let's take a look and blah, blah, blah. So for me, it was easy. John King is the best in the business when it comes to the magic wall, especially on election nights and stuff like that. My parents, they
stop.
They were okay.
Were they able to do it?
They eventually could do it. Yeah, they wanted to rewind and watch the show over and see their little boy on television.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite newspaper columnist?
I'm not going to mention any names because I love a lot of them.
Okay.
And I don't want to just highlight one or two. But the answer is, I'm still, as I said, a news junkie. I love reading news. I love reading the columnists and op-ed
Hard
pieces.
copy or?
I get the old school print edition of the Washington Post and the New York Times delivered to my home every day, and I get that. I often, if I look at the banner headlines on the front page, if it's good, I'll post on Instagram or Twitter what the print editions of the New York Times and the Washington Post, I did it this morning, are just to give a sense of the news that's out there. But I still read newspapers every day, usually the night before online, and I'll check it out. But I'll go through I like going through the print edition of the papers because that's the way I grew up.
So can I get personal, like really personal?
It depends.
It might be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So have you ever had a physical from Dr. Sanjay Gupta?
No, but I've spoken to him many times. He's never done. He's a neurosurgeon, so I don't know if he does physicals that much.
Nothing prostate related.
No. But he's a great doctor, and he's a great journalist too. And it was really underlined to me when we were in Kuwait City before the war, the Gulf War, and as the war was starting, the Iraqis were launching Scud missiles into Kuwait City, and I was anchoring our coverage, and missiles were coming in behind me. And one missile hit a shopping mall right near Kuwait City, a high-end shopping mall with very major stores in there. And our security people told me to put on a gas mask and get ready in case there was. But Sanjay was there. He was covering the war with me, and it underscored that he wasn't just a great neurosurgeon, but a great journalist, because he immediately volunteered to go to that mall and do live shots from the mall with his gas mask on, even though it was dangerous, obviously. And I often remind Sanjay, Sanjay, you were a lot more courageous than me. I was just anchoring our coverage, but you actually went to the mall that was blown up by this Iraqi Scud.
Sanjay would have taken the Floyd down, So
maybe he would have.
One more question before the final question, so I guess it's the penultimate question. If you weren't a journalist, what would be your dream job?
Well, my dad always wanted me to go to law school. And I always thought about it. I always assumed that's what I would wind up doing. And then international relations just popped up, and I always loved international relations and travel, and I thought, let me try this. But if I had gone to law school, I would have been a lawyer.
Litigator, not a corporate guy.
Lawyer. My dad was a very successful home builder, and he dealt with a lot of lawyers. And I used to go with him to work, see what he was doing, and I guess I would have probably become a lawyer if I hadn't become a journalist. In fact, when I told him I wanted to be a journalist, he was nervous. My dad was old school. He said, journalist. He said, can you make a living doing that? And I said, I don't know, but it seems like a pretty good. So he was very supportive, and he said, look, if it doesn't work out, you'll go to law school.
I just thought of this when I was in college, was when the Scuds were raining down on Israel before the first Gulf War, and there was a group of students who went on a mission to Israel to show support. And I remember my father saying, given his Holocaust, you don't go to a war zone. He was not comfortable with that. The fact that your parents survived what they did, and I guess you can't say allowed, but were happy with what you were doing. That's interesting.
Well, when I was in a war zone, they were nervous.
Yeah,
obviously.
but because they knew what it meant. It
Yeah.
wasn't fun and games.
Yeah, when I would go cover a war, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere, they were nervous about it, but they understood that's my job.
That's the job. So just to a final question. So, what does it mean to you to be Jewish and a child of a survivor in the role that you have? What does it mean to you?
Well, I'm very proud of my Jewish, religion, very proud of my Jewish heritage, my history, very proud of my parents, what they went through and how they survived. It means a lot, I'm very proud of my whole history, my whole tradition, my whole family background, and it's just a source of pride that my parents survived and managed to start a new life in this country and did very well and had a wonderful family and a wonderful life. So it obviously means a lot. And as you noted, I did a piece on CNN about my family roots, which people can go watch if they want. But it was just, something that's very meaningful for me to do. And I'm glad that CNN wanted me to do that.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you're doing things like this to help educate people. You're a terrific role model in terms of being proud of who you are in that background. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of Yad Vashem in Israel and the American Society for Yad Vashem for taking the time to share your story with our audience.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to Yad Vashem for all Yad Vashem has done over the years and continues to do. So timely right now, so important. We're grateful to you, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you and people who are going to be watching this.
Thank you.
Thank you.